Hello YouTube, Sidekick here with another installment of the Iron Bomber's Guide to the Galaxy. Today we're going to talk about a topic which may not sound all that exciting, but which is, I think, maybe the most important thing you can do to improve your accuracy in iron bombing. That is, developing a good range practice routine and applying it over and over and over and over again. Yes, I have come to the conclusion that in DCS there really isn't any shortcut to getting good at iron bombing. There are no magic bullets, or bombs for that matter. No matter what you do, to deliver an iron bomb successfully, at some point the pilot has got to get everything lined up and press the pickle at exactly the right time. It's a physical skill, and like all physical skills, it can only be improved by practice. And like any physical skill that you practice, if you don't practice it in a repeatable way that allows you to learn from your mistakes, you won't make consistent progress. So, today let's go back to the range and talk about the practice pattern. We'll take a look at the pattern, and we'll get out to the range and practice it with multiple aircraft so you can see that the principle stays the same, whether you're flying the A4 or the A10. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to make adjustments when you're practicing. So let's take a look at the range practice pattern. It's roughly based on the one described in this publication that we've been using kind of as the basis for all of this, CNATRA 1209. But bear in mind that the one described in the publication is specific to the T-45 Goshawk. The specific numbers will be different depending on what aircraft you'll be flying, but the basic principles will stay the same. So far, we have concentrated on the part of the attack that starts at the roll-in, and I repeat it here on the principle that repetition is the mother of retention.
Okay, let's take a look at our old friend, the standard dive bombing attack. Let's look at the steps in order. First of all, once we get to the right spot, we're at the right altitude and right speed, we're going to roll in. We're going to roll until our lift vector is pointed at the target. We're going to pull until the flight path vector, in that case this is the top of the sight ladder, is over the target, and we're going to roll out. Then we're going to pull the flight path vector up to the aim off point, and we're going to wait. And we're going to wait, and when the pipper is over the target, we're going to know we're at the right altitude, and we're going to release the bombs.
But an effective practice session depends on getting that roll-in point fairly consistently. Otherwise, how will we be able to actually make adjustments? So let's take a look at a practice pattern that starts at the end of the attack run. At this point, I'm going to describe what I do. This conforms to the general principles in the CNATRA document, but you should feel free to develop your own procedures. It will only be important to standardize on something if you want to, for instance, run a multiplayer practice session. At that point, you'll need to all be using the same pattern, so you may want to agree on exactly what numbers you use. Okay, so here's a tack view animation of me flying the pattern. After the release, I generally pull up strongly to avoid losing any more altitude than necessary. Generally, the pull-up is between 2.5 and 4 Gs. Now, I like to end the pull-up at around 25 to 30 degrees nose up. This depends a little bit on the aircraft that I'm flying. The idea is to pick a fly-out angle that doesn't kill the speed too quickly, but still allows you to gain altitude. Of course, all of these numbers will depend not only on the aircraft, but the pattern altitude. For this video, I'll assume that we're using a 12,500 foot pattern altitude because that's what we've been using in our A4 practices. After pull-up, I like to fly out at the pull-up angle until I reach about 6,000 feet, maybe a little bit more than that, again, depending on the aircraft. I start the turn with a 60-degree bank turn, and then I generally moderate the back pressure on the stick to hold my airspeed above a minimum climb airspeed. Again, this varies with aircraft. For the A4, I find that this minimum climb out speed that I like to use is about 275 knots. For instance, for the Su25, it's about 425 kilometers per hour. But again, your mileage may vary, but those are the speeds I like to use. I continue this turn until I am at 30 degrees off the reciprocal of the attack vector. I'll say that again, 30 degrees off the reciprocal of the attack vector, which of course on the iron bombing range where the attack vector is due north, that's 210 degrees. So this is called the abeam position in the CNAPTR document, and you should be able to look left and see that the target is ahead of or off your wingtip. At this point, I roll level, and I generally pull up to continue climbing into the pattern altitude. Again, keeping at around that best climb speed, though maybe I'll sacrifice a little of that now to gain that last little bit of altitude. As the target goes behind me and I get close to the pattern altitude, I start to turn in and also level off. And now it's a matter of jockeying climb angle, power, and roll-in attitude to aim to fly around the target and end at the roll-in point or initial point. Now, this will be different with every run, and it does get a little bit easier with practice. The general idea is to gradually increase your bank angle right up to the roll-in point. If there is one thing you want to be careful of, at least I need to be very careful of, it's the tendency to sag at the end and let your nose drop in that last little part of the pattern before the roll-in. To review, here are the important parts of the pattern: the pull-up, the fly-out, turn to the abeam position, the abeam position, turn in and level out, and finally roll in. So, just to give you an idea of what this looks like over multiple runs, here's attack view animation both from the side and from above of multiple patterns in a single practice session. And as you can see, my patterns are not entirely consistent. I should probably work on that. But they do manage to deliver me to a fairly consistent roll-in point, which is the objective, after all.
Okay, enough with the pretty pictures. Let's head out to the range. Here we are in an A4 on the iron bombing test range. And we're just finishing, we've done the flyout, and we're starting to turn around to the abeam position. So you can see we're holding our speed at around 275, altitude's coming up, trying to keep the bank angle at around 60, and we're waiting to get to 210. And when we get to 210, we roll out, take a glance over. So we're just going to roll out here. So we're well behind the target, so we're still well abeam of the target, basically. So now we can start our pull-up, and we're going to fly until we're past the target before we start to turn in. See the altitude's coming up nicely at this point in the pattern. So we'll start taking a little look at the turn in. Once again, trying to keep the altitude coming up to 12.5. Trying to not turn in too much. We're going to have to make an adjustment. We started to turn in a little early this time. So we're going to keep it, back it out a little bit. Okay, so now we're trying to keep that altitude at around 12.5. A little high. Leave it off a little altitude. Make sure we don't let the speed creep up. And we start to turn in now a little bit more. I tend to use that dark splotch that's just disappeared under the rim of the canopy as kind of my initial point, or at least a gauge of my initial point. We're a little inside that. It's probably going to be a little bit steep at this point. trying to keep from turning in too much. It's a fairly shallow turn in. Here's the roll-in point. And we pull the lift vector to the target. Roll out. Get ourselves lined up. Pull up to the aim off mark. And we wait. And pickle. And pull up. And we pull up to around 30 degrees. And we wait for something around 6,000. Roll left to 60. And start watching the airspeed. It's at 300, so we keep a little bit of back pressure, but it's falling. So we'll just ease off a little, try and keep it at around, not let it get too much below 275. This just by what I've gotten used to with practice. I find that gives me the good balance between climb rate and keeping the airspeed. If you let it get too low, then your climb rate starts to suffer. There's probably a magic number in a book somewhere. If somebody knows it, feel free to let me know. Okay, once again, we're rolling out at 210 in the beam position. Try and get things stabilized here. Pull up again. Start gaining altitude. And as we start to get close to 12.5, start to level off, glance left, roll in. And now we're in an Su25. So again, just to show that it's the same pattern and the same mechanics regardless of the aircraft you're flying. In this case, we're doing the turn-in. We're a little farther out on our turn-in this time. Of course, the only issue with the Su25 is you could convert everything to metric, but you'll have to trust me that we're about the same. We're a little bit higher pattern altitude with this one. But so as you can see, we're a little bit farther out, so we're squeezing in a little bit here at the end of our circle, and then we're going to roll in. Pull the lift vector to the target. As soon as we get a view of that target cursor, we're going to put it below the target. And we're going to pick an aim off point, and we're just going to wait. And when we get our light, we're just going to let the cursor get over the target, pickle, and away we go. Pull up strong. 30 degrees. Good drop. Wait for something around 6,000 feet, so a little around 2,000 meters or close to it. Bank left at 60. Keep back pressure on the stick until the speed drops to around 425. Keep pulling back into the turn. Keep watching the compass. Even staying a little bit fast this time. And when we get to 210, we're going to roll out and be abeam the target. And then we're going to pull up and make sure we complete our climb back to the pattern altitude, which is around something like a little bit under 4,000 meters. There we are, beam. We'll start our turn in. Once again, moderating the turn in to arrive at the initial point, and here we are in the Harrier. And we're performing exactly the same procedure. So each of the airplanes is a little bit different. One of the things, for instance, with the Harrier is I find that since you fly quite a bit faster, with the Harrier, it definitely changes the amount of bank that you need. And it also, you have to be careful in the Harrier to fly out a little farther because it does fly so fast that if you don't give yourself a little bit more distance, you end up with a pretty short pattern. The Harrier is definitely by far the fastest of the jets, at least that I've tried on the range. And you can see we're approaching that roll-in position. We'll wait until we're looking at the line, and then we roll in, and the procedure is identical even though we're using CCP-IP. Lift vector to target, roll the flight path vector, out on the target, pull up to an aim off point, and then just make adjustments to keep the cross below the target, and let go. And pull up strong to something around 30 degrees. Decent drop. Keep pulling up. And it says, we'll pull up, maybe even a little more than 6,000 in the Harrier. Oh. Okay. You can see I was flying in VR, that's why it's not aligned. Yeah, so we'll put 7500 in the VR, and then we turn to around 60. And once again, we pull back. In the Harrier, we're trying to keep something around 350 knots. And we just let the stick pressure off to try and keep that climb out speed, and we get whatever turn we get. So again, this is me in VR trying to figure out how many bombs I have left. And once again, we're pulling out at 210, checking that the target is still in front of our wingtip, so we're at the beam position. And we're going to pull up and aim for that 12,500. And we'll start moderating our speed. And we start the turning. And now we're in the A10. One of the challenges in the A10 is getting back to the pattern altitude, especially if you drop pretty low. You can see we're a little bit under. We're still going around the target. Now, the other thing I find with the A10 is because it is quite a bit slower than the other aircraft, you don't need quite as much bank to do the turning, so you have to be a little careful not to overbank. And you want to just try and keep enough back pressure on the stick to keep climbing. We're probably going to end up a little bit low at the initial point, so it'll be all right if we're in a little bit closer. It's not as critical in aircraft like the A10 and the Harrier to get exactly the right pattern altitude for an accurate drop. But there are some reasons why you want to do accurate patterns, especially when you're trying to practice dropping from a certain altitude, which is something that will become part of our practice when we use those aircraft. So this isn't a great pattern, but it's just to show you that the picture looks very much the same. We're a little bit farther. It's going to be a fairly shallow pattern. So once again, at this point, I'm not trying to get that altitude up too much more, just trying to get a good roll in. And then we're going to repeat the same procedure. We're going to pull the lift vector up to the target. We're going to get the flight path vector on the target, and we're going to get it rolled out. Then we're going to pull up to an aim off point, and now we're just going to make small adjustments to get the bomb fall line over the target, which means the pipper will cross the target, and when it does, we release. And then we pull up strong, and back to something around 25 degrees or so in the A10. Don't want to get going too slow in the A10 or you just lose all your climb entirely. Pull out to around 7,000, 7,500, and then we're going to start a 60-degree turn to the left. And again, we're just going to keep pressure on the stick. At this point, I'm just flying the airspeed, trying to keep it around 175 because that's a decent climb at airspeed, and I'll just let the stick pressure on and off to try and keep it there until we get to the beam position. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea of what the pattern looks like in a variety of different aircraft. Let's just step back to the whiteboard really quickly and talk about how to make adjustments when you're practicing. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about quickly is the effect of the aim off point on your drop altitude, and because of that, the actual spot where the bomb will hit. So let's take a look at a standard run. Got all the things we usually have on screen. You can see that we're aimed at an aim off point, and we're going to fly down to it until we get the pipper over the target. Then we know we're at the right altitude, and we can release the bomb. Okay, so we'll mark that altitude with the green line. Now let's back it up. Okay, this time let's move the aim off mark farther away. And then we'll change our aim so that our flight path vector is over the new aim off mark, and we'll come in again. Now, because the new aim off mark is farther away from the target, we're going to reach the point where the pipper is over the target sooner. I'll say that again, because there's a greater distance between the aim off mark and the target. We're going to reach the point where our pipper is over the target sooner, which means that we're going to drop at a higher altitude, which means that we are going to drop shorter. I'll say that again. We aimed longer, but we are going to drop shorter. That is really the important thing that you have to remember. Okay, so as well as adjusting your aim off mark, there's other ways that you can adjust where the bomb is going to fall. So let's just take a look at those quickly. If you want to drop longer, then your options are to fly faster, to drop lower, and to drop lower, that means aim shorter. So once again, yes, to drop longer, aim shorter. If you want to drop shorter, you can fly slower and you can drop higher. In order to drop higher, as we've just found out, you need to aim longer. So once again, to drop shorter, aim longer. Okay, fellas, that's going to do it for all of the classroom session today. Time to get back out to the range and get some practice in. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, please do subscribe to the channel, like the videos, definitely get the notifications on so you find the next one when it comes out. But for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.